Okay, welcome to Bridges of Belonging, episode number 31. We're so happy to welcome you into the space today and look forward to having this amazing conversation with Nesreen Ali and Marika Warner. My name is Andrea Carey. I'm the Chief Inclusion Officer with Inclusion Incorporated, and I want to begin today by acknowledging the territories that I'm an uninvited guest on here on Coast Salish territories, home of the Esquimalt, Songhees, and Wasanich nations. And I've been an uninvited guest here for many years. And as we head towards the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation next week, just really taking time to reflect on the histories of the peoples in this region and the trauma and hurt that we've collectively experienced as a country and that each nation's navigating through as we continue to discover the remains of all those beautiful children across this country and in the United States as well. So today we're going to navigate through a beautiful conversation with two incredible humans that I've had the opportunity to work with, one a little bit and one a lot, and looking forward to sharing their stories of belonging with each of you. I do want to also mention as we get started that we've enabled live transcription. So if that's helpful for you to experience the conversation, then you can on your toolbar click the see full transcript and you'll be able to follow along that way as well. So what we're going to do today is begin with a reading, as we usually do on Bridges of Belonging. So today I'm going to read from Richard Wagamesa's book, One Story, One Song. And I've been working my way through this book, sort of coveting it over the summer, because it just has some really beautiful pieces in it, and many pieces that, although it was written about 10 years ago, are really speaking to some of the times we're navigating right now, including a whole section on truth and reconciliation. That he really kind of foresaw a lot of what was going to come to light. And so it's been a nice kind of grounding piece for me. So I wanted to share with you. So here's our little conversation starter today. The old ones say that humility is the foundation of everything. Nothing can exist without it. Humility is the ability to see yourself as an essential part of something larger. It is the act of living without grandiosity. Humility in the Ojibwe world means like the earth. The planet is the epitome of a humble being, with everything allowed the same opportunity to grow, to become. Without the spirit of humility, there can be no unity, only discord. Humility lets us work together to achieve equality. Humility teaches that there are no greater or lesser beings or things. There is only the whole. There is only the great, grand clamor of our voices, our spirits, raised together in song. And knowing what I know of each of our guests today, that just seemed like it really fit for me in terms of how you each contribute to the spaces and places that you're in and what I know of you. So looking forward to learning more about you and to sharing your journeys with our audience. So we're going to begin with a bit of an introduction with each of our guests and then invite them to share a little bit more about their stories. So I'm going to introduce Marika first. Marika is the Director of Research and Evaluation for Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment. And we met through the MLSE Launchpad, which is an incredible space in downtown Toronto that brings underprivileged youth in and just creates a really welcoming and supportive space, an opportunity for them to develop through develop through sport, and build social and developmental skills. They focus on youth at risk and creating safe and welcoming place for them to learn, develop, play, and grow. And Marika is just a really bright spark. And so I've always been drawn to listening and learning from her, and recently heard her speak about some of her journeys as a leader, and just thought this is such a rich conversation that I want to bring forward in Bridges of Belonging. So thank you for joining us, Marika. And Nesreen is the Manager of Inclusion Projects at Inclusion Incorporated and comes from a background of government relations, public policy, and working with youth at risk, as well as an LGBTQ, I2S, and gender equity work. Nesreen joined Inclusion Incorporated team almost a year ago as a collaborator and then came onto our team full-time in April. And it's just been an absolute pleasure to work with her and learn from her on an ongoing basis. So Marika, we're going to invite you into the space to share a little bit more about your story and for us to get to know you a little bit.
Fantastic. And thanks, Andrea, for having me here today. So I'll just speak a little bit about my pathway. I've been full-time in the sport industry for over 5 years now. I grew up in Winnipeg, Manitoba, in a community that was a white and First Nations working class community. I became involved in the dance world at, well, a late age for dance, but fairly young in my life, and that just became my world. So progressed through dance conservatory, became a professional dancer, and then became a physiotherapist, looking to sort of give back to the dance community in that way. But pretty quickly found myself working in different settings with people experiencing a range of complex health and social and economic challenges, and particularly in the downtown East End of Toronto, where I was working in a community health center for several years. And through that as well, got involved in research, went back to school, became very passionate about research as a way to determine the impact of some different things that I was trying in the community, things that I believed worked, and wanted to put some rigor around investigating the impact of those interventions. And really, taking a different approach with physiotherapy, a public health approach, a population health approach. So then this job at MLSC came up, and I went for that, and it just really brought together a lot of different aspects of myself, my skills, and my expertise, and where I wanted to go. So yeah, this job that I'm in now really allows me to combine my love for science and analytic thinking with passion for sport and physical activity and getting people moving as well. So right now, my research focus is really a lot around sport for development and the impacts that can have, particularly for youth facing barriers, physical literacy and what that means for communities, equity, diversity, and inclusion in the sport space, the role of sport in anti-racism and Indigenous reconciliation, and corporate social responsibility and professional sport as well, and sort of the intersections between all of those different areas. And that's me.
That sounds so fascinating, being able to kind of play in all those spaces and weave all those spaces together, because there's so much connection between all of them. And I don't know that we're really surfacing or talking about that in some of the ways that we could and should be as we go forward.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Marika, and thanks for kicking us off. Now I'm going to head over to Nesreen and invite you in, Nesreen, to share a little bit more about your story.
Thank you. And Marika, I'm so impressed. I love dance. I'm like a dance fanatic. I've watched every single season of So You Think You Can Dance. I'm just impressed. We got a lot to talk about. So a little bit about me. So I grew up in Hamilton, Ontario, and in a social housing project. When people refer to the projects, and I think about it being developmental housing in the States, is actually what Canadians call it too, which I think is kind of fun. So I grew up in a family with that didn't have a lot of access to sports, didn't have a lot of access to dance programs, things like that. But we always sort of figured out how to move our bodies and get with it. I was talking yesterday with our one of our clients around how my first bike and how fun that was, and how getting active was just really just a way to be free outside. I currently am located in Vancouver, Coastal Salish territory, as an uninvited guest. My family by background is from Africa and the Middle East. So my mom's from Morocco, my dad's from Iraq. I am Indigenous, my lineage is Indigenous to Morocco. I come to this work through that lens because I think I'm not just doing this to make myself feel good or other people feel good. I think I'm trying to heal the world that I see, and heal the world so when my family and their family comes forward, that they have a better place to land in. And when I think about the question of who are you, it's so many things. I'm creative. I love food. I love my dog. I love going outside. I love my friends. And I try to bring that into my work now as the manager of inclusion projects. I'm trying to help people do things that, you know, remove the barriers so and make a better world, but also help them heal and have the tough conversations. And I mean tough as in recognizing your accountability, recognizing that you've harmed others and how you can heal, and recognizing the healing within you. And that speaks to sort of my value around allyship, because any justice for me is justice for everyone, and justice for you is justice for me. And so always looking at that sort of infinity sign with this work, and how all of my actions have impacts on others, and how all of their actions have impacts on me, and how we can work together to build the world we want. That's a little bit about me right now.
What a beautiful way to start us off with how connected all of this work is, and all of your actions impacting others and others impacting you. We are all part of this ecosystem, and we need to figure out what that looks like as we go forward, because it's changed a lot. And not maybe it hasn't changed, but our perceptions of it and our understanding of it, I think, has changed a lot, particularly over this last year and a half or so. So Marika, I'm going to go back to you. I would love for you to share a bit about your journey of belonging. So maybe start with sort of a feeling of not belonging and how that showed up for you. And we'll begin that conversation there with the not belonging.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so yeah, I have an example for this one. I was at a company-wide MLSE staff sort of edutainment day a few years ago, where full-time staff come together in person pre-COVID to network, hear about corporate initiatives, socialize. I hadn't been with the organization very long at that point, and I didn't know a lot of folks. So I was standing by myself in line for the lunch buffet. So there's 3 staff in front of me, and it was 2 white men and a white woman. And I smiled at them, tried to make eye contact, trying to introduce myself, maybe strike up a conversation, but none of them acknowledged me. So naturally, I just listened to their conversation, as one does, standing in line for the buffet at a work event. And they were talking about an event that they had been at recently, where Joe Montana had been the keynote speaker. So at that time, Joe Montana had been in the media around what was happening with the San Francisco 49, specifically with Colin Kaepernick taking a knee during the US national anthem to protest systemic racism and police brutality. And Joe Montana's comments on that issue had been along the lines of shut up and play the game. Quarterbacks don't need to worry about that kind of thing. Quarterbacks shouldn't be thinking about anything except football during the season. So I was feeling a bit ew about their conversation, because they were clearly like, wow, Joe Montana, he's the greatest. Was pretty clear from the way they were speaking that they were, big fans of Joe. So then they rehashed a moment during his speech where he had walked up to a woman sitting in the front row and held her face in his hands. And my ew meter just went up like 1,000 levels, totally repulsed, thinking of this extremely entitled Republican football player touching a random woman's face apropos of nothing. And the 3 employees in front of me in line started making jokes then about the Me Too movement, trivializing issues around consent, implying that any woman would be thrilled to have her caressed by Joe Montana randomly in public in a professional setting, of course. So these 3 staff had first ignored my presence, refused to acknowledge me, invalidated 2 issues and movements that I consider myself to be a part of, Black Lives Matter and Me Too, through that conversation. So I was speechless. And in that moment, I really questioned my ability to thrive in the sport industry if this was the culture that I was going to be surrounded by. So that's one difficult experience that really, where I felt to be quite outside of the place where I was.
Wow, my ooh meter went way up too. So thank you for that. Oh, the whole, consent, I don't know, that just flashed big in my head as well. That's a really strong example. And I can only imagine how uncomfortable for you. And then it's like, what do you do in that moment? What do you do? And in reflection upon that, what do you do? And I'll look forward to coming back to you in a moment to kind of fast forward to hear how that's played out for you. Nesreen, what about you? Can you share a time when you felt like you didn't belong?
Yeah, the e-meter was so funny. Thank you so much, Rika, for that. I think So yeah, I can think of a few examples, but I think just to riff off the work example, I had started at a new role with the government of Alberta. It was my first policy job. I was super excited. I had like gotten my new outfit from Reitman's and walked in, and I realized that no one in the office was there to greet me, and I'm waiting around for someone to come, and then the acting manager who was supposed to kind of shuttle me in and then and get me oriented and all that shows up. And the first thing she says is a comment about my weight, and starts to make fun of me, which some people do that because they're nervous or because they don't know how to make conversation. And then it continued on into a 3-year-long relationship where she would make offhand racist remarks, insult me, insult others. And it caused me extremely serious mental health issues, and actually resulted in me taking leave from the role that I was in for a few weeks. While at the same time, I wasn't just performing, I was also overperforming and doing some really groundbreaking work for inclusion, for queer and trans inclusion in our housing and homeless system. And I think those times don't just happen, they happen in moments, and then they extend to weeks, months, and years. And they're really, really caustic to your sense of confidence, groundedness, and belonging in an organization. I share that story because I don't think it's actually that abnormal. And I share that story because to me, it spoke to how cultures really don't understand this concept, and really don't understand it's not just micromanaging or bullying, it's not just excluding, it's this constant need to be on edge and this constant need to be hyper vigilant. And so personally, as a racialized person, as somebody who does have anxiety, who does experience PTSD, I don't walk through the door even keeled every day. I don't walk through the door feeling confident and comfortable, not just because of my work environment, because the environment in which I live is not designed for me to exist and thrive. So when you have someone in a position of power, who is also validated by other people in positions of power and those who work for them, treating you in that way, it's pretty disorienting, because you have this sense of rightness and equality and fairness in your own head, and on paper, legally, and in your employment agreements and union agreements and so on, that your employer should be treating you with fairness and respect and not make racist comments or comments around your body or things like that. And yet they do, and yet no one steps in and stops it. And for me, it's actually translated into being more of somebody, not who will get in fights necessarily, but somebody who, if I see something, I say something. And it might seem like I'm being nosy, or maybe I'm putting myself in situations of conflict, but if I'm in a position of relative privilege to somebody else, and I can take 5 seconds out of my day to check in with somebody who I think might have been harmed, or push back on something, I will, because that moment, like I said, can lead into weeks, months, and years. And if you can stop it in that moment, maybe you can prevent it down the road.
Ooh, wow. Thank you. And what an incredible opportunity for you to learn from that. But a great empathy that you've gone through that and that you've had to navigate that in the first place, and so much about why and what this work needs to be and how we need to be thinking differently and challenging ourselves and each other every single day to do better, think better, learn better, unlearn all of the pieces. Marika, I want to go back to you, and Nesreen reflected a little bit on sort of her learnings and what she took from those experiences to translate into her practice. What about you? What did that example or other examples mean for you in terms of how you show up in the world, what you need to do to support yourself, to support others? What does that look like for you? You might be on mute, Marika. There you go.
Yeah, no, I wasn't trying to talk yet, just thinking.
Okay, pondering.
Yeah. And I'd say, and what I'm doing right now is actually a big part of what I learned from experiences like that. It's allowing myself to take in what others say or do and really let it land before I respond. So, considering how I've been affected and how my actions are likely to affect others, and allow that to inform, but not dictate my choices. So really, focusing, I'd say, on sincerely attempting to give others a good experience, whether that's in a meeting, at a MLSC staff edutainment event, at a dinner, when I'm making a presentation. And a lot of times that means really listening properly for me, and listening in an embodied way with my, with every cell of my being, so that I can better process the events that are happening around me and respond to them in a way that I feel good about and that is likely to, have a positive impact on those that are around me as well as myself, I would say.
Any pieces you want to add, Nesreen, to sort of what Marika just said?
I like that piece that Marika talked around embodied. And I think, as I'm going to go back to that fact, you said you're a dancer, but I think that's what dancers are so good at, is they're good at, so they have such a skill in embodying emotion and expressing it. And I think we sometimes approach this work as it's a diversity policy. It's something we wrote, and great. But I want to be able to walk into an organization where I feel like I am physically, emotionally, and mentally safe. And that is a much more healing approach than just thinking or saying the right things. Because all of us who've had these experiences have heard someone placate us many times, have heard them say the right words. But we want to feel at the end of the day that when I walk through the door of my job or my home or my relationships, that the outside world is a little bit further away and safety and comfort is a little bit closer. That's all. I think that's all I can add to Marika's comment. So.
It's beautiful. And I mean, ultimately, that is a place where you can belong. If you can find those places where you feel safe and comfortable and you can show up as you are, that is a place where you then can feel that sense of belonging. So let's go there. Let's talk about a time when you did belong. And Nesreen, why don't you kick us off and share what that journey's looked like for you?
Awesome. My story involves my dog, so I'm really excited about this one. I am a very active, try-hard cross-country skier. So I love cross-country skiing because it's very affordable and it gets me outside. It's great. But I found that over the years that I was doing it, I didn't look like the people who were other people who were skiing. When I went to buy clothing, it was really awkward. I would always get things that just I felt made me look not flattering. And I took a lot of courses and I just never was that great. Like like I said, I'm a try hard cross country skier. I'll do it no matter what, but it's not going to be pretty. And last year I adopted a dog. His name's Kona, and he's a 50-pound husky shepherd wild thing. And because of his breed, I was like, well, he'd probably love skiing with me. And oh, this is so sad. This makes me so happy. I love him to bits. I went skiing for the first time after I had no longer been with my ex-partner, which was a whole situation in of itself. And when you share activities with your partner, like that's the thing that you belong with them, and it was the first time I'd gone with him, and he had an amazing time, and he was pulling me like a little husky. And I remember one day we were coming down this really steep hill, and so I dropped his leash because I didn't want to get pulled off my skis. And he's running down the hill, and people are like clapping and cheering him on. he was just loving it. And it just felt like, I was like, oh, I finally belong here. I finally have my partner in crime. And I finally feel like it doesn't matter who else is on the trails. It doesn't matter what my fitness level is. It doesn't matter what kind of skis I have right now. I belong here, and this is what I'm supposed to be doing.
Nice. Kona sounds awesome. Love hearing you talk about him.
Right. That reminds me so much of some work that I've been doing with a research collective out of the University of Alberta talking about intersectionality, but we've kind of dove into a number of different areas, and one of them being elsewheres. And elsewheres is a piece researched by Tuck and Yang and Dr. Tricia McGuire-Adams out of University of Ottawa, and Janelle Joseph out of University of Toronto, Dr. Janelle Joseph out of University of Toronto, have just submitted a paper around elsewheres and the research that our team's been doing. And it's really kind of exploring what is that place and space where you just feel like you can just be you. That's your elsewhere. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's really beautiful. So that really resonated with me as you were explaining that, Nesreen, and talking through that example. So Marika, over to you for your belonging story.
Cool. Okay, yes, I will describe one of my elsewheres. And sometimes I honestly feel like the weirder, the more offbeat the activity that I'm engaged in, the more belonging I feel sometimes. And the first example that comes to mind for me is when I was part of a very avant-garde fringe festival show in Edmonton. This is about 20 years ago. So at the beginning of the festival, Fringe Festival in Edmonton is huge, awesome festival. There's a parade, all the performers walk the streets to publicize their show, drum up interest, build their audience. And I remember I was wearing a homemade dress-like garment, I should say. It's like kind of like sci-fi garment. It had thigh-high slits, built-in squirt guns inside the dress garment, and I was walking the parade along with all my castmates who we were all dressed identically. The play was called Splatter. Major theatrical elements was that the cast splattered each other with different fluids. We splattered ourselves, the audience, each other with all sorts of different fluids throughout the show. So I told you this was gonna get weird, and it is about to. So we had 4 squirt guns built into our costume, and the holding tanks were hidden underneath this sort of space age dress garment that we were wearing. We were all barefoot, walking the streets, just making a big old scene, yelling, dancing, singing, parading. We were in a very fun, sort of accepting, colorful part of the city with a bunch of other oddballs, actors, dancers, street performers, circus artists, musicians. So it was a blast, and it was a rush, an emotional high for me. I often in my life worry about being different from those people who are around me. And in this situation, I got to be very different from the mainstream, but also hold common ground with the people around me. So it was possible to be way outside, like very much an outsider, and also be very much an insider at the same time, and really be reminded that belonging does not have to mean being the same. That's an experience that still brings some joy to me to speak about today.
Andrea, you're muted.
Can you hear me now? Okay, sorry. I don't know. My computer's being weird. It doesn't show me if I'm muted or not right now. So sorry. I'll try and play along. I was just saying that fitting in and belonging are not the same, and yet there's sort of an assumption in society that there are, and I think that's a belief we really need to challenge, because belonging means that you're changing yourself to be part, and you should be able to be exactly yourself in order to belong.
That's such a great point. And if I can just quickly go back to, my experience at MLSC. And I think that has been a shift over time too, with the sport industry towards, looking for belonging, not looking to fit in anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to actually stay on that, Marika, in terms of what your experience in sport has been as it's kind of evolved. And I mean, MLSC over the last year in particular has been, I'm going to say, sort of out there pushing the envelope in terms of some of these topics. So how has that looked and felt for you as an employee within it, given some of your experiences? I'd love to learn about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'd say it's been fun. It's been challenging, demanding. There's just a lot of work involved there. and a lot of work that does tend to fall to Black members of the team, which is, it's an opportunity. It's a burden that I'm happy to carry because I am happy to be Black, and I feel like that's something that comes along with my racial identity. So it's also this sort of feeling of, am I going to just wake up one day and this is going to be over? Like, are we just going to feel like I blinked and 2020 no longer is part of our reality? So it's constantly having to sort of look around and look for touch points to remind myself that, like, no, this is real. This is actually happening. This conversation is happening. These changes are happening. And just really trying to bolster my belief that this is real. And I think that's something I really struggled when I first came to MLSE with, accepting the authenticity of my company's commitment to corporate social responsibility. It's like, yeah, sure, pro sports world. Yeah, you want to do good in the world. Great. Okay. Yeah, we can, say whatever we want to say, but at the end of the day, we all know what this company exists to do, and that's make money. So, for me, it was a process of coming to see the authenticity of what MLSE is trying to do in the community. And I think it's the same thing around equity, diversity, and inclusion. Really just using these moments to try to make a little bit more space for myself and for my Black colleagues to, flip some bats at work, to connect with each other in ways that we haven't, to have conversations, to use words that I wouldn't normally use in a meeting with my boss or with my senior management team. Just really get over some fears and strictures that have been part of the sport world, that are part of the status quo in the sport world that, just we don't need anymore.
Yeah, that must be a really interesting journey and a vulnerable journey, trying to navigate, like, what is now okay that wasn't okay? How do we have these conversations? How do we surface some of the pieces? How do you say things to your boss that, a year and a half ago, there's no way you would have been, it would have been okay to say? You probably would have been penalized for it. And now it's like, oh, tell me more.
Right. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Nesreen, I want to go to you, kind of similar. I mean, we're working with a whole variety of clients, having some of these conversations, supporting them to have some of these conversations. How is that feeling looking for you? And what do you kind of resonate with on a daily basis that supports you to do that?
I mean, I think when the reason I kind of entered this work is because I wanted to be paid full time to do it, not just do it off the side of my desk. And I feel like one of the things I start off with when we're educating our clients and supporting them in this work is just saying, if you're going to ask equity seeking groups, so racialized folks, queer and trans folks, folks with disabilities, to give you advice, you should also consider that is not something that they develop just by reading a book. They develop it because they had some pretty bad experiences or some better experiences, hopefully. But it is a lived experience that should be valued and considered like a skill, a unique skill. And so that you're not, overloading them and asking them for advice all the time. I think there's moments where, like we did the queer and trans training on Saturday, and almost every time somebody comes out to the group, and it's like, to me, I'm like, that's so cool that they felt safe enough in our conversation to do that. And now they have one more identifiable person within their community for which they can plan for being in the room, first of all, and also get to know. And so those things are sort of like the nuggets and the highlights. And I think sometimes when it can be more difficult is when my voice is being scapegoated for an organization's lack of personal accountability and responsibility. And I feel like in our working relationship, Andrea and I have talked about this a lot, there's this notion of tone and timing and making sure people can hear what you have to say, but also remaining authentic to the truth of what has to be said. And so I try to be as honest and blunt as possible, but without fear and without not necessarily concern, but like without fear of retribution. And I feel like more and more I'm developing that skill, but it is something I have to learn and unlearn, because I'm like, oh, white supremacy. Like, it's like, no, but white supremacy is a really bad thing We all exist in a culture that prioritizes that, and these are the characteristics of it. So don't be afraid of the word, be afraid of the harm that's being caused instead. And so having that shift has been really awesome, because I would be in organizations that are like, oh yeah, we're not experts in Indigenous relations yet, so we can't really speak on or do anything or any work on that. Or, you know, this was funny. I had a boss tell me, you know, you think racism is bad. Remember when we had a head tax? It's like, it's just like really ridiculous things like that you're like, wow. And I feel like the clients that we have are in a much more of a space of readiness and wanting to move forward. So they are open to hearing feedback, and they are open to like change, which is awesome. At the same time, it's important for me to maintain emotional safety, because sometimes I'm reading through very, not even triggering, but very difficult, heavy things that I want to hold it with kindness, and that I didn't realize had more of an emotional toll and took more resources from me than I anticipated. I'm very happy, of course, to do it, but yeah, it's continues to be a balancing act. I'm very bad at balancing, and continues to be something that I'm intrigued by and interested in and find really interesting. But at the same time, our clients, I think, really gain a lot from that perspective. And I think I can't walk away thinking that I never said everything I need to say too. So that also feels really good that I'm able to say it. And typically it's taken with a grain of salt and people and turn it into action. So yeah.
Marika, I'm curious if that resonates with you, or if there's pieces you want to add to that before I move to the next question.
It does definitely resonate. And I think, you know, it's nice. It's a good call for me to get more behind that see something, say something approach. It's something that I am doing more, but to really be conscious of not letting things go. I think it's a really awesome point, Nesreen.
So I have a question for both of you. Maybe we'll start with you, Marika, if that's okay. But you know, bringing that lived experience of, you know, being women doing work in a variety of different environments and being racialized women, I'm curious about sort of that intersectionality and how that shows up for you in terms of your journey of belonging, and what, you know, you've both shared a bit of some stories today that certainly reflect some of the challenging circumstances and situations you've encountered. But how does that sort of come together for you as you reflect on your journey of belonging, and yeah, just what that story looks like?
Yeah, and so for me, I think intersectionality is a lot about self-acceptance. And I do believe that the more I accept myself and who I am, you know, as a Black woman in Winnipeg with all my, you know, myriad identities, the easier it is to experience belonging in a variety of different settings, work, personal, etc. So I moved back to Winnipeg recently from Toronto after leaving Winnipeg in 1999, not really looking back at all. And the dynamics of race and culture here are very different than in Toronto. And that's been really challenging for me to adapt to. But I think it's that self-acceptance that has really allowed me to be here in my full self. So, you know, I'm more regularly treated like a second-class citizen here based on the color of my skin, the way that I present here, than I am in Toronto. I'm often perceived as First Nations, both by Indigenous people and by white people. And that could be a very alienating situation, to be seen not only as inferior and other, but part of an other group that I'm not actually part of. So what's important to me in navigating that is that I know who I am racially, culturally. I have an unshakable relationship to my identity as a Black woman. I have an unconditional love for Blackness and Black people and Black women. And I know that we're amazing. I know that even if people that I deal with day to day don't necessarily. I'm also very clear on my relationship to indigeneity, to Indigenous people, to the land that I live on. And by accepting who I am, I can have positive and negative interactions with people from different backgrounds without ever wanting to be something different than what I am, which is very different from my experience growing up, where I felt like an outsider and I wish more than anything to be white so that I could fit in. and the fullness of who I am and my very multifaceted identity is a very powerful thing that I never want to be without at this point in my life, that I never want to put down or hide or diminish. So that's where I'm at.
Whew, wow. Yeah, so many pieces I'm sure that you've had to unpack and navigate to get to that place. So thank you for sharing, and for, I mean, just the courage it takes to navigate through some of that and figure out really who you are and how you want to show up in the world, and embracing all of your beautiful identities. Nesreen, over to you for the same question.
Yeah, just to reiterate, I think Marika said that something, Black women are amazing. And I think we have to acknowledge that a lot of our social movements today are the result of Black women. Tarana Burke, Kimberly Crenshaw, Adrienne Marie Brown, like like Olivia Butler, like their thinking and their activism and the work that they've done to bring us forward is not just for Black folk, it's for all of us to feel more equal as well. It certainly starts there, but we have so much debt to Black women especially. And anyway, I just want to pause with that and say just thank you, Marika, as well, for sharing your experience on that. And yeah. So I'm just reviewing the question again. I think for me, belonging in other contexts was an intentional shift, and making intentional decisions around what spaces I lived in and what boundaries I had with those spaces. So certainly, I totally agree with Marika. It's about that self-knowing, like I am who I am, no matter what the environment is. And then my move, everyone asked me like, why'd you move from Calgary to Vancouver? And I was like, I'm just tired. I'm going to pay to live in a city and feel constantly under threat of racism, of sexism, homophobia, transphobia. Like I'm just, or like, anyway, I'm kind of tired of it. And for me, it was also just a personal emotional safety thing. I'm a survivor of domestic violence and had experienced various forms of street and intimate partner violence there. And I decided that I needed to make an intentional decision on where I wanted to live, where I felt the most safe. And I'm living in Coast Salish territory now, feeling much safer, much more grounded, much more connected. And so for me, it's and that, sorry, just to look back to the belonging piece and self-knowing, that also aligned with, my core values. One of my core values is nature and being around nature. And so how can I continuously nurture that for myself, build that connection to nature, understanding it, protecting it, and so on. And it's been really important to just allow my nervous system to calm down and allow it to relax. And I don't think we account for all of that neurological stuff when we're like, oh, we just want people to feel good eventually. But all of those things are so important to your body functioning, your physical health, your long-term health, and so on. And I think the things that have helped me really figure out who I am have come through also having great role models. Like I mentioned, some of the Black women at the beginning of this answer that have really influenced me, but also friends who've taken the time to have an hour-long conversation around their identity and their relationships. People who've invited me to different events, and people who welcomed me into their ceremonies, into their cultures. I think that's also been very important as well, discover who I am. And then just, general self-inquiry and good therapy, I think is really important. So.
Thank you for that. I'm so, I think the piece around sort of grounding your environment and finding that place where you can just be, and you've had to leave some pieces behind in order to navigate that. But and for you, going to a place where you felt safer, and Marika, from what I took from your answer, you've gone to a place where you feel less safe, but you're closer to family. So I'm sure there's a bit of an offset there. But just interesting how places have such an influence on our journeys of belonging and where and how we can show up. So yeah, open to either of you if you want to have additional reflections on that and what that's looked like for you.
Yeah, as you were speaking, Andrea, I just was reflecting more on the sport world and sort of some of my experiences growing up, wishing to be white so that I could fit in and be part of the group at school and in sports. I was really drawn to sports that lacked diverse racial representation, so gymnastics and then dance. And I excelled as an athlete, unfortunately. But I do remember feeling just so much shame about my race, specifically in the gymnastics world. And then after leaving gymnastics to focus on dance, really feeling like I did belong, even though, looking back, I can see that I did experience prejudice and discrimination in that context, in how I was graded as an athlete and an artist based on the shape of my body. But I do feel like I did, through that experience of being a dancer, become very comfortable in my skin and my body. And I attribute a lot of that to my involvement in dance as a Black girl and then later as a Black woman. So yeah, sort of just reflecting on, those two different spaces as like being one much safer for, I'm not even sure what reasons, and one much less safe.
Yeah, interesting, right? And I mean, I'm always so fascinated, like we end up in these situations where, we're experiencing harms, or, I always kind of describe it for myself as like this toxic stress where it's just like, I'm not sleeping, I'm not eating, I'm not functioning very well. And when you're in those moments, how you figure out how you're going to get out and what you're going to do next and what you can do to shift the dynamic within those situations. And, in our early years of sport, in your example, I'm sure, might not even been conscious, right? Because it's like, you're so young. It's like, how do you even begin to process what you're experiencing? You just know it doesn't feel quite right. I want to go to a conversation around like from where each of you are in your life, in your career, in how you're showing up in the world. How are you facilitating others feeling like they're belonging? Like, how are you inviting people in? How are you creating those spaces? How are you supporting? And maybe also what you still need others to do to support you. And why don't we stay on you, Marika?
Okay, sounds good. So I think, to me, there's no work more vital around appreciation of diversity right now than the work of Indigenous reconciliation. So that's really, I'd say, my focus. I'm working to connect with Indigenous individuals in my community, to co-collaborate on challenges that affect Black and Indigenous people and all people. And I'm trying to really live with the truth that we're all relations, that the experiences of the Indigenous members of my community affect, me, my son, his future descendants, and also that those current lived realities are rooted back for 7 generations to all of our ancestors as well. So I'm doing things like learning Indigenous language and history, celebrating different aspects of Indigenous art and culture, have access to, vocally, creatively supporting movements for Indigenous sovereignty and justice in the same way that I hope that Indigenous people support Black Lives Matter movement as well. And I'm learning about those movements and their objectives in a deeper way. So, to me, I think the call to action I would put out is just really learning about each other, learning about the struggles that the different people are engaged in, the histories of those struggles, the goals of those struggles, what it means for people, different groups of people to win in life, in this life. And that can really bring us together. And I think nothing really builds belonging more than being seen for who you really are. So seeing others in that sense, like really doing what you can to be able to enable yourself to really see other people in their truth.
I love that so much. We often use being seen, being heard, and being understood as sort of a grounding piece in the belonging work, and sort of thinking about like, what do we need to do to really show up in that way, to learn about each other at that level, and to create those spaces and places and opportunities to learn about each other. And I mean, that's really why we started this series a year and a bit ago, was because it's like, there's so many beautiful stories out there. How do we start to learn about each other in a different way that's not just sort of this transactional, like, you're in a hallway or you're on Zoom, but like, how do we deeply start to understand what some people's experiences are and what that's meant and how we need to think differently to create that richness of relationship. Thank you for that. Okay, over to you, Nesreen, about how you can support others to feel like they belong, what you still need support around.
I think my deep, like Marika said, that deep recognition and reckoning with being a settler and what that looks like and what my role is going forward. I think started for me too late. I think we learned about these things too late, and not too late, but like later than we should, I should say. That's something I've been thinking about in terms of how I respect and act as an uninvited guest in this territory. I'm not really sure. I really don't know the protocols. I really don't know how I should be contributing. I try to, when I do have resources to donate to, whether it's GoFundMe campaigns or mutual aid campaigns for our folks. You might see that on social media, something like that. And then it's also, I've always think just being the disruptor. I have a problem with things like being the same. I think that's sort of my issue. I think this is a really funny story that I think Andrea will really appreciate. When I was in grade 5, I did a chapter, like a book report, and you had to do an analysis of every chapter. And I wrote every analysis of every chapter in a different font. And then the teacher was like, "You can't do that." I was like, "Why?" So I like to disrupt things and just disrupt how people think about inclusion. And I think that's what I'm going to continue to focus on. So don't just think about men and women being equal. Think about women, men, non-binary folks, trans folks, two-spirit folks. How are they all going to be equal and included? What does that spectrum look like? What's that beautiful rainbow we want to see at work? For me, I guess what I just need more people to just take accountability for your actions. I think it sounds so, I don't know, maybe simple or trite, but look, if you're going to hurt somebody and someone's going to say, "Hey, you hurt my feelings," don't say, "Well, that's not what I meant," or "You didn't understand it." Actually listen to them, have a genuine, deep conversation. And if you don't know how to do it, get the skills to do it. And I see that very often is that people in our culture, and I'd say Western and Canadian culture, are very good at we're the peacemaker, right? We know how to be diplomatic. We know how to communicate in high-risk situations and calm people down with kind words, but we don't actually know how to take actions that make people feel like there is equilibrium, that there is equity, that their humanity is of the same value as others. And I think when we talk about it at that deep level, we move away from this work being about the feel goods, and it's about actually, it's a little bit more tactical, a little bit more strategic. And so for me, I just want to see more people call up the Islamophobia that they see at their workplace, actually make relationships with people in Muslim communities. I feel like a lot of the time Muslim women we just assume that they're supposed to be harmed, that they're supposed to have their hijabs ripped off, that they're supposed to be yelled at in the street. But that's not okay, and that's not normal. And I want people to take accountability for that. And so we've just had an election. There'll be many other municipal and provincial elections over the next few years. Have your elected officials make it a priority and hold them accountable on an ongoing basis, and use your voice to influence them as a voter, as a donor, and have the conversations with your family and the people who mean the most to you.
The sentiment around, Canadians being nice and placating, I think I saw, and Marika and I are both sort of like nodding our heads, resonates strongly. So Marika, if you want to jump in, feel free. I also think, we are not good in society about teaching people the skills to have some of the conversations that we need to be having now. So I think that's made it really difficult for people to navigate, what do I do? What do I say? How do I say this? Because we don't really have the skill sets that we need to have some of the conversations and to ask the types of questions we need to be asking to learn and unlearn in the ways that are required. So we're heading towards the end of our time together. I would love for each of you to just share sort of one wrap up thought, feeling, expression, something you want folks to take away from today, to use Nesreen's piece at the beginning, like to show up in allyship, to be a disruptor, to just do different based on what they might have heard or learned today, or they're navigating through all that's going on in our world. So Nesreen, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. So for me, there's a quote, and I can't remember who said it, but it says it's something along the lines of "Your life is your justice," and I think that to me always resonates because it's about you existing and you doing your laundry, you making yourself coffee in the morning. That's justice. You live despite a world that doesn't want you to be there and doesn't invite you to be there all the time. And I think that for me is a motivation and a little bit of to keep me going when it seems a little bit too hard. To take a bath when I need it and go for a walk when I need it. So yeah, your life is your justice, and what's the legacy you want to leave behind? I would ask every person on this call to think about that.
Your life is your justice, and what's the legacy you want to leave behind? Beautiful. What an incredibly powerful way to wrap up your time with us today. Thank you. Marika, over to you.
Yeah, that is gorgeous. And there's like a sort of more lighthearted sort of riff on that. My life is justice. I have a friend who says naps are reparations. So, I'll just throw that one out there too. The cupcakes are reparations, or whatever, you like to do can be considered reparations. So, and I'll just go back. I want to circle it back actually to something Andrew was talking about at the beginning with the reading around. And I think, this past year, it's been easy to, there's been a lot of pain. There's been a large amount of pain experienced in this world. And it's been really easy to sort of hold that really concentrated pain very close to ourselves. And I speak for myself, hold that pain very close to myself and really smother myself in it and, just kind of wallow around in it. So it's that humility piece of taking that pain out of that concentrated space and really letting my pain sort of like live in the world where it's much more, it's dilute. And in that way, it can be tolerated and we can move through it and we don't have to sort of drink this glass of concentrated pain because now it's in the ocean. So yeah, that's my last point.
Wow, I think we need to put those both on quote boards and share them out to post this, because both of those were fantastic. So letting your pain live in the world instead of living within you is what I sort of took from that last piece. Marika, thank you for that. So thank you to both of you. What an incredible opportunity to get to know you a little bit more and to share your journeys and just the beautiful humans that you both are with our audience today and beyond today's conversation. And, if there's pieces I can do to show up for you and support each of you, please let me know, because I look forward to just continuing to build on this relationship with each of you. So thank you to both of our guests. Thank you to our audience today. For some reason, my computer's being a bit weird, so I can't share our slide for our upcoming guests, but our next session, episode number 32 of Bridges of Belonging, is October 19th at 11 a.m. Pacific, and will feature two incredible Paralympians, Nate Reach and Tara Yanis, and we'll be talking about their journeys of belonging on that conversation. So thank you, everyone. Take care, stay well, and thanks for being here today.